So the global trading system over the decades has coped with an awful lot. It's coped with wars, it's coped with pandemics, it's coped with recessions, it's coped with a big ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, it's coped with all sorts of stuff. What it's not really had to cope with before is governments who are really determined to pull their economies apart from other ones, or at least pull the sensitive parts of their economies from other ones. And that's why we're in a situation that we haven't been in, certainly since the end of the Cold War.
So the levels of disruption, the locations of them may well change, but organisations still have that global mindset, and some point somewhere around the world there is always something happening, and change becomes a normal constant for any organisation.
Welcome to the stage, all three of you, Alan Beattie from the Financial Times, Mike Bristow, Managing Director at DHL Supply Chain, and Sigrid de Vries, Director General ACEA. Thank you for coming for our final session. I want to sort of start actually taking up what, in a sense, what we've just been talking about, but the global picture first, the geopolitical situation. And Chris Giles suggesting that there were circumstances where actually that situation might be more stable. What is each of your views about the picture over the next, well, I don't know, the foreseeable future, which I suppose is in the next year or 2 years or whatever? Alan, kick us off.
I think the foreseeable future is probably the end of this week, maybe, or the week after. And that is the issue, because to follow on from what I said in the video, by the way, in case I look really peculiar now, I did that in a hotel room when I was looking like this. I was also extremely jet lagged. But you know, you've not been in a situation before where the politics is so completely unstable. I think we're going to look at what might happen in the US later.
Yeah.
You know, what's often happened in trade before, and this is particularly the case in the European Union, is there's a big degree of continuity in trade policy, right? Whoever you vote for, right, the trade directorate always gets in, yeah? And US trade policy, whether under Democrats or Republicans, until Donald Trump, had been the same pretty much since the end of the Cold War. Clintonomics was the same as Bush's trade policy, was more or less the same as Obamonomics. And you're not seeing that now, obviously. In the EU, now, I'm slightly more confident even now about the EU, because it depends which kind of right-wing government you're talking about. When Giorgia Meloni was elected, I remember a whole bunch of stuff about, here come the populist right, they're going to smash apart globalization, da 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 da. Giorgia Meloni's electoral base are not sort of disaffected older people who think everything has gone wrong. They're not younger people who are desperate because they can't get jobs. They're actually the highly productive, highly efficient, export-oriented industries of northern Italy, the same people who voted for the League. So it remains to be seen, and of course Marine Le Pen has shifted further and further and further away from this wildly Eurosceptic position that she had as time has gone on. So the reason I say it's difficult is because we are in a situation where not only has politics changed, but politics has become much more volatile, and that volatile politics will and might, particularly in the US, affect trade policy in a way that it's not before.
Yeah. Mike, from the perspective, as it were, as a practitioner, I mean, how far ahead are you looking?
Yeah, I mean, I think reflecting very similar things to the early conversations. Concern points for ourselves are all about the amount of instability. I certainly feel that, you know, often the discussions about is stability getting better, is it getting worse? I certainly feel that it's all event based, and the amount of events are coming thick and fast and close together. And from a time frame perspective, you've got to look far out. So a lot of the strategies and the dialogues that we're having internally within the organisation and with our customers are all around resilience. And resilience isn't something you can fix in 1 or 2 weeks. It's 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And the amount of events coming, I do feel that the resilience levels of organisations will be really tested by.
Okay, let's put the events to one side and look at the actual relationships now. Look, I mean, one obvious one, Sigrid, is the relationship at the moment between the EU and China, and this business of EVs, obviously, which has huge relevance to people here, but actually more widely as well. Where are we and where are we going, do you think?
Where are we? Still investigations ongoing, de-escalation efforts on their way. because there is indeed a real worry that there is going to be a trade war, which nobody wants. So I think, yeah, people trying to figure out where this could be heading. There is one of the previous speakers said China can't export its way out anymore, it's become too big. But I think equally the EU can't regulate its way out any longer. The Brussels effect is becoming less dominant. So they need to find a different way to play the game. I think the rules of the game internationally have changed, geopolitically, but also when it comes to trade policy. So we're talking about resilience, about security, geopolitical tensions on the rise, a lot of insecurity because of the elections in France, but also in the US later on. So I think, and especially for the auto industry, that is such a global industry, they will always advocate in favor of free, open, fair trade, open borders, to be able to innovate and to compete. But at the same time, we also need to be able in Europe to take better care of ourselves.
You were in China recently, Mike, am I right in thinking? What's your impression of this relationship and indeed more widely?
Yeah, when I took my first trip over there 2-3 weeks ago, I staggeringly impressed about the ability to industrialise and scale and bring such quantities to market in an area, and I'm absolutely wrong to mention the OEMs, but I was fortunate to go in a couple of the factories, but the size and the scale and the endeavour that they take is amazing, pretty inspiring really, to be fair. And you certainly reflect about how that and the conversations about whether they can export the way out of it. I don't know if they can or not, but they're going to give it a good try. Yeah. And the size and the size and scale and the quantities and the inevitable price points. I think it's the price points that's going to put such pressure, certainly in that middle tier around I think the premium auto sector is probably sort of saved to one side. I think it's the 80% in the middle, which will come under real pressure, and that'll drive the pressure on things like tariffs and. Tariffs never work, and from an overall perspective.
Well, then, talking of tariffs, let's turn to the United States and the Trump victory, and tons of tariffs on all sorts of things, in fact, on everything. I think at one stage he was saying, and still is. So, the impact of Trump, Alan.
I mean, he has a bunch of ideas out there, all of which are wrong, some of which are actively mad. The maddest one, and this is there on his. This is not just a rumor of something that has appeared in the Washington Post. It's actually there on his website. Is that you could abolish the federal income tax and replace all of that income with tariffs. That is arithmetically. It's not just mad. It's arithmetically impossible. Right? It cannot be done. But they have, and this is absolutely true. They have this affection for the 19th century in America, where tariffs were used as a big revenue-raising tool, and they're absolutely convinced that America's industrialization came behind tariffs. They also, the Biden administration does this as well, but not quite as explicitly. They also use tariffs just as a form of threat and bullying and leverage. We will put tariffs on you if you don't do this. Now, the interesting thing is, in the first term, that wasn't always necessarily it clearly wasn't systematic. It didn't actually make sense, because the ones where they put national security tariffs on steel and aluminium from all countries, including the EU and Japan, long-standing allies, right? Just made no sense at all. Also, with the way they were implemented, was often quite haphazard. My very favourite one was when, since this is a car conference, when Trump was threatening to put tariffs on European cars. Jean-Claude Juncker, who was then the European Commission president, who had eccentricities, but just on his day could be absolutely brilliant, went across to Washington, completely bamboozled Trump, saying, if you don't put tariffs on US cars, we will buy tons of soybeans and LNG from you, right? Nobody told Trump that actually the European Commission does not have a procurement fund of tens of billions of dollars, nor the space in the basement of its building to store huge amounts of soybeans. Nonetheless, he believed it. But tariffs are something that they really like, and it is something that they regard as a tool which can be used in a bunch of different situations.
But, I mean, is the death of it as a policy, where someone whispers in his ear, it would be massively inflationary, and if you do come to power, it will be partly because of Americans' dislike of inflation, and that will kill it?
Well, he absolutely doesn't believe that, and there's no secret here. He's given a bunch of interviews, CNBC and other people recently. He says, no, I don't think it is inflationary because I think the other country bears it instead of us. Logically, he does not understand what tariffs do. And I don't think he sees any downside in them at all. You have to remember that his US trade representative in the first term, Robert Lighthizer, who might well be the Treasury Secretary in the second term, made his living as a lawyer defending the steel industry, which is the most protected industry of all, and of course is very conveniently for itself happens to be heavily based in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which are the swing states in the presidential election. He likes tariffs. He made himself a millionaire putting tariffs on steel. He used the money to buy a Porsche, imported car, nice touch, and drove around Washington in his imported car. So they believed in tariffs. They actually believe in it almost as a religious thing. It is a good thing. It is part of American history. We will continue to use it.
Sigrid, let's turn to Britain and this discussion we've been having sort of on-off during the course of the whole day, actually. The relationship, the new relationship, the reset that there might be if there's to be a Labour government and they decide to either do what they've sort of hinted at doing or go much further and do something that they haven't hinted at doing. From the European perspective, from your members' perspective, the view of Britain and of that possibility is what?
I think there needs to be continuity as much as possible. So regulatory alignment needs to continue, maybe here and there restored. That would be the best thing because there's still a lot of integration. But, Brexit was a textbook example of how the EU internal market had actually supported an industry also in its global competitiveness. So there's still a lot of integration. So it would be good that there is a close cooperation, and you saw that now with the rules of origin discussion. And we saw it with the establishment of a motor vehicle committee in the TCA. So that's, I think, very positive, and it needs to continue because, you've been discussing a lot of issues that we're discussing in Brussels. It's just only across the channel all day long as well. The issues are similar, and we have a cost premium manufacturing in Europe, as you do here in the UK, and we need to build also vehicles for global markets. So many of the challenges are the same, and it would be an illusion to think that there can be two very, very different routes.
A wider one for you, Mike. You actually move stuff around. It's your job. Advice to people who are interested in import and export activity and how it is being impacted by all of these things from your own company's perspective.
Yeah, I think, as I say, an organisation that's sort of purpose is all about moving stuff around the world between sort of 240 countries we operate out of. Complexity of supply chain's massive. The ability to move things around and through some of the customs paperwork and that type of stuff is a massive factor for organisations. Resilience, and then driving in the simplicity. So the more simple we can make help make a supply chain with our customers, the better for them, and take out a lot of the headaches of that out the way. As we see more tariffs coming in for individual parts and components, the complexity is growing more and more and more, which is where organisations such as yourselves, and there's many of us that do this in the industry, the value of that, and outsourcing there rather than doing yourself is a key part of it.
Do you have something to add to that? You were looking at me as if you wanted to.
No, I fully agree.
No, okay. At that stage, then, let me throw it open to anyone who wants to ask any questions of the panel. I've got a couple more that I'd like to come to, but I'm conscious we are going to be losing time if I just concentrate on my own questions. And someone there with a hand up. We'll get a microphone down to you in just 1 second. Here it comes now.
Simon Godwin from FINIA again. In terms of trade with China, at what point do you think that politicians are going to start to realize that one of the massive problems is that we have regulations over here which require exactly the type of vehicles which China has a massive relative benefit or relative advantage in making.
I think they have realized that by now.
But then do something about it.
Yeah, but exactly, that's then the next point. I think that's why Europe is trying to be more resilient. We're calling also as Automotive Trade Association for better access to raw materials, to really smarten up the regulatory framework, to make it less burdensome and less costly, to do something about skills, to have the enabling conditions in place. I mean, everything that China actually did, they supported their industry with subsidies, but also with a huge network of charging infrastructure and so on. So I think we need to get our act together and have a good discussion with policymakers about it. Not that we didn't try to do that before, but I think there's a bit more momentum to now indeed get there and get to the implementation. And all the talk about whether the targets are right or not, I think the direction of travel is very clear. We don't want to reverse, we need to accelerate, we need to work together on that. And now it needs to be implemented and get done.
Alan.
So I'm a trade person rather than a car industry person, so I'm quite willing to be contradicted by everyone. But it's very interesting how the EU and the US have taken very, very different routes to dealing with the Chinese issue. The US, 100% tariffs, and they're going to huge amounts of fiscal spending, right? And they're going to create an EV market within one country, as far as they're concerned. The EU, for a variety of reasons, not least it doesn't have the money, is not doing that. But what it's trying to do is calibrate the entry of Chinese EVs into the market. So they put, as you may know, the anti-subsidy duties on Chinese EVs. Those were quite carefully chosen, right? I mean, they pretend they're all very scientific and to a formula, but you can tweak them if you want to. So they're putting them at a level where they're aiming to slow Chinese EVs coming into the market without actually blocking them or making them much more expensive. And also, and this is the critical point, in making it in Chinese companies' interests to partner with European countries, to set up JVs, and also to do exactly what Japanese car companies did, particularly in the US, and I think also in Europe in the 1980s, which is tariff jump. I come and set up in the EU, right? They're already doing this in Hungary. I think BYD is set up in Hungary. I think I'm right in saying that Chery has bought a former Nissan factory in Spain. France has said, we welcome you in, There's some interesting issues with this, particularly if you believe, as for example President Biden does, that EVs are a security issue as well as a competitiveness issue, right? Smartphones on wheels is his expression, and he thinks that's a genuine security issue. The EU presumably doesn't, or it wouldn't be doing this. Now, this is a big experiment, and it might go horribly wrong, right? This really might destroy the European car industry, in which case the Americans will go, told you so, because they want the EU to do what they've done. And I'm not quite sure what the EU does then. But what the EU does at this point, it may or may not be right, but it is a strategy. Okay? It is a strategy that is based on talking to car companies, using the trade tools that are there, and trying to come to an outcome which will involve both European and Chinese companies being active in the market.
Are the Americans not doing that?
No.
I mean, when it comes to allowing people in to build the stuff in the States?
So they... at the moment, they have a very small EV market anyway, right? And the demand is going towards hybrids. But their idea is clearly do not have Chinese imports coming in. With regard to Chinese investment, it's not clear what they're going to do, and in fact, they can't actually use their current tools to block greenfield investment. However, it seems pretty clear that if it comes to it, the Biden administration does not want Chinese companies. If you genuinely believe this is a security threat, these people will be collecting, will be collecting personal data and commercial data and funneling it back to the Chinese Communist Party. You're really not going to want them to set up a plant with 3,000 people in Kentucky with a whole bunch of Chinese scientists and data engineers and so forth. Interestingly, Trump, though again, this is Trump, who knows what he's going to say tomorrow, Trump has actually said a couple of times, we're quite willing for China to come in and build companies here, as long as they use American workers, not Chinese workers.
That's why I asked the question.
But whether
I'd heard
Trump,
someone say that.
But that's Trump. That's Trump, not Biden. But whether or not that will survive him coming into power and and encountering the security state is another thing.
Yeah.
But I can just say more generally with regard to the geopolitics you said at the beginning. it's not just there's a lot of politics around, it's that all sorts of things that used not to be political, are political now.
Yes.
Right? The sort of, the security aspect of trade used to be really narrow. People like me didn't really bother covering it. It wasn't that interesting. It was all about what they call dual-use technologies. We could use military tech, Now it's everything, right? If you think EVs are national security, you think everything is. The US is starting to talk about anything to do with climate change being national security. If anything to do with climate change is national security, that gives you the right, as they think it does, to ignore world trade rules. Everything is national security. The absolute high watermark of this so far, I'm sure it can be beaten, but the absolute high watermark so far is garlic. Senator Rick Scott of the great state of Florida has, with a straight face, proposed that America ban all imports of Chinese garlic.
All right, yeah.
Chinese garlic is bad, it makes Americans sick, and it weakens America from within.
Yeah. Isn't the world capital of garlic in California somewhere? There's one town which manufactures garlic. I wish I could remember its name. Anyway, I can't. Anything to add to that? Going back to the question.
Back to the question. I think it was about garlic, but I think from a political perspective is the angle of the consumer. So from a Chinese OEM hitting into the European markets, it's good for the consumer. It reduces prices. It brings more alleged quality, more variety, and I think that's a different dimension, maybe in the short term. But I know certainly with we started working with a number of the OEMs, and things like adding them onto our car lists and stuff like that is really popular. So I think there's an angle on that side which I think goes beyond the political piece. But this won't be the first time there's been an entrant to a European or a UK market. And the Japan comment was right, and I can see that following suit. Especially when sort of more tariffs get loaded in, and then the desire to put more made in a particular country comes around. So, but we shouldn't forget the consumer piece because it's...
Okay, time for another couple of questions if there are. Yes, gentleman over there, we'll get a microphone to you. Hold on just 1 second, it's coming around the front here. Gilroy is the name of the place. I've just remembered it, by the way.
Gilroy, California.
Capital of California. Yeah, I think Clint Eastwood was the mayor briefly as well, but I might go.
Many places.
Yes, hi. Chris Horseman from Borderlex. We've only got 2.5 years to go before the next cliff edge on rules of origin on trade between the UK and the EU in electric vehicles. Is the industry supply chains going to be able to meet the new rules that will come into effect on the 1st of January 2027? Is there going to be enough battery capacity in place? Thanks.
Mike?
I think, from 2.5 years away will fly by. That's adding more complexity, more, in a sense, people may call it red tape, but more data analytics behind the scenes. Will it really drive to further opening up new facilities for new, say, battery manufacturing? We're seeing a bit of that in the UK, but I think it will overload more on the processing of data. And then how does the production of something, how do those component parts work through a supply chain to be defined as being produced in a particular location? So a long way to go, but you can see many organisations putting the steps in place, but it's going to add complexity, without a doubt.
Sigrid?
It's going to be very, very hard because we see that establishing a very deep battery value chain is very, very difficult. Run into many challenges. We see manufacturers cancelling contracts with European new corporations setting up shop. In Europe. So it's going to be very, very difficult because it is simply very complex and difficult to build this deep value chain where Europe doesn't have the core expertise, so it's going to be hard.
Alan?
This is not anything I have a great expertise on at all. I would only point out that there was a lot of talk last time that no, they would not extend the rules of origin, right? Lots of noises emanating from France, right? That's what France does. I'm not being rude when I say that's what France does. That is what France does, right? That's one of its functions. Everyone knows that's what they do. And I think, I suspect what will happen in a few years' time will be determined by what has happened within the European car market, and for example, what's happened with Chinese EVs, right? Because by that point, they may just really have their minds on something else altogether. One other thing, by the way, we were talking about the effect of the US election. The UK could end up in quite a difficult position because it's obviously economically very heavily within the EU centre of gravity, politically being a member of the Five Eyes intelligence network and so on and so forth, it feels itself in allegiance with the US. And if the US starts to try and put the screws on Britain and says, we want you to clamp down on this tech and that tech and EVs and so forth, you know, that could be quite dramatic. The reason I look slightly jet lagged there is I just came back from Australia, where I was last week, and Australia, having been bullied by China over its exports there, has made this very definite play to be part of the American thing, right? Yeah, they've put together this military alliance, AUKUS. They were one of the first countries to drive Huawei completely out of their 5G network. Now, reasonably easy for Australia to do that, because Australia does not have complex manufacturing supply chains. It doesn't have a car industry anymore, right? It exports commodities, and it can just shift the exports of those commodities. The UK cannot. We know this, right? We know this, that the UK car industry is dependent on the EU. So there could be some real difficult, if the administration, new administration of either side actually tries to really put the screws on the UK from a security point of view, that could really be quite difficult.
Okay, that's the downside. Let's finish on an upside. Where potentially, Mike, if we were to think of the best outcomes for the automotive sector in the next, I don't know, year or so, what would they be? What, if we were sitting here in a year's time and things had happened successfully, what would be the actual practical steps that had been taken that you want to see taken now?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my perspective, I think the adoption of EVs or hybrid technology and seeing that through to a reasonable period of time, I think will be really good. I think we had some of the speakers earlier today talked about, you know, are we plateauing?
Yeah.
There's been so much investment into that infrastructure, and being able to see that through for a period of time will be a real positive. And I think getting somewhere towards some sort of stable economy, that people can then start making longer term decisions. And we do feel a lot with the customers that we connect with and work with. We're still very short term. Decisions on investment and decisions on what to do within organisations become quite short term nature because of the amount of investment they're putting in. So,
is that, Sigrid, is that word stability? Is that the single word that we're all kind of clinging to? Because that is something very much, when you talk to Labour politicians who assume the incoming government, they use that word stability as if that is in itself a decent thing to go for, and then we can think about other add-ons like improving the NHS, etc. The first thing is stability. Is that kind of the view from Europe as well?
Absolutely, because I would politically and geopolitically hope that we have a stable situation in the US and also in the EU. We have elections in France coming up, so there we need stability. And then indeed, when it comes to EVs and the auto industry, that there is really a mainstreaming, a mass market adoption of EVs, that we have achieved that in a year from now. That would be amazing, because again, that then also delivers the stability to have the revenues to continue making investments and have a thriving industry here.
Final thought, Alan. What do you hope for in the next year that you think that you may not expect at the moment, but you'd be pleasantly surprised by?
Do I expect this to happen or not? Maybe. This may seem slightly gratuitous, but one of the big problems over the last few years is that the policy-making process with regard to trade in the UK has been fundamentally unserious. Right? It is not based on reality. It is not based on sound judgment. It's based often on wanting to make political points and prejudice and creating narratives. Okay, a situation where the Secretary of State for Trade flies off to Florida to sign a piece with a big, on taxpayers' money, and to sign a big piece of paper saying, look, we have a deal with Florida. It's just a piece of paper that literally says on it, this piece of paper has no binding legal content whatsoever, right? I mean, it's there. That's just not. So what I would say, in something as short as a year, I would like a new government to have a proper trade policy out. It's got a whole bunch of really good civil servants, by the way, that's already there. A proper trade policy function which makes decisions based on evidence, which consults with experts, even if they disagree with them, which has proper parliamentary scrutiny, and which, by the way, unifies the policy towards the EU and the policy towards the rest of the world, which are currently in different departments, and essentially sets a course which says, towards alignment with the EU. They said they won't go into the single market and the customs union. I think that's wrong, but just to recognise that that is the future. An operation that works and pointed vaguely in the right direction.
There we go.
The 12-month period, that's all I asked for.
Alan Beattie, Sigrid, Mike as well, thank you all very much. We will discuss Europe now, but a huge round of applause first for you.